Hello everybody and welcome back to video 2 of plant nutrition. So we're going to continue where we left off. We were talking about the effect of varying light intensity. We're now going to look at how carbon dioxide and water get in and around plants. So we know that these two substances are required for photosynthesis. So where do they come from and how do they get into the leaves for that? So with CO2 it's pretty straightforward. CO2 is absorbed through the underside of the leaves. There are little gaps or holes known as stomata that the CO2 are drawn in through by diffusion. So CO2 goes in, diffuses into the palisade cells and is then used for photosynthesis. For water, it's a little bit more of a tricky route. Of course, not to try and be funny. So water is coming through in the soil. It's getting absorbed through the root hair cells by osmosis into the root hairs, through the cortex of the root and into the xylem. The xylem is the water transporting vessels in the center of the stem, and they're found right down into the roots, and they run from the roots all the way up to the leaves. So the water is then drawn up through the xylem, okay, and into the leaves. It comes out of the leaves. Some of the water will evaporate out of the stomata. Some of that water will diffuse into the palisade cells for photosynthesis. So generally we always have a continual movement of water from the soil up to the leaves, and this movement or the removal of water from the leaves and from up through the stem is called transpiration. And we're going to look in a lot more detail at that in our next kind of inquiry into plant transport. So we're not going to talk too much about it today. We'll have done some investigations into leaf structure, which is fantastic. So just to remind ourselves that we have, at the base of our cross-section of our leaf, we have guard cells on either side, and in the middle what we call a stomatal pore. And the whole thing together, the stomata and the guard cells, is called the stoma. Okay, we have a cuticle on the bottom, which is a waxy layer, which is entirely waterproof and impermeable to water. We have then our epidermis, which is just a layer of cells either side of our guard cells. We then get into what we call the spongy mesophyll. So this is a really, really crucial area. You can see it's not very dense in terms of the number of cells in it, and that's because there needs to be plenty of air spaces for CO2 to diffuse into and water vapor and oxygen to diffuse out of. Okay, and so you can see there's not so many there are some chloroplasts in these cells, but not a huge frequency of them. Over here, you've got what we call our vascular bundles. You've got xylem vessels and a phloem vessel. Xylem for transporting water, phloem for transporting sucrose once photosynthesis occurred. Okay, water will move from the xylem into the phloem, dissolve the sucrose, and take it around the plant. Okay, so these are for transport, entirely for transport. At the top here we have our palisade mesophyll layer, which is made up of palisade cells. Okay, these are the ones that are mainly photosynthesizing. You can see the large number of chloroplasts in each one. Above that we have the upper epidermis, just like the lower epidermis, and on top again a waxy cuticle. Okay, so the cuticle is very waxy just to prevent water loss. Taking a little bit more detailed look at a palisade cell, it's got that typical plant cell structure that you'll have been learning about since year 7. Cell wall around the outside made of rigid cellulose, which is a complex carbohydrate. Chloroplast, a real key feature. Cell membrane is the line inside of the cell wall, pushed up against the cell wall if the plant cell is turgid. You've got a nucleus with genetic information of the cell is contained. Cytoplasm as a site of lots of little things going on in the cell, lots of cellular processes that are occurring, like respiration. And there are parts of photosynthesis that are occurring there as well. And a vacuole in the center, which is often used as a storage space for, can be starch grains stored in there, there can be sucrose stored in there. It's usually can be a storage for water, and provides the cell with turgid pressure. So the water, as it fills up in this balloon, puts pressure on the outside, which subsequently puts pressure against the cell wall and keeps the cell very turgid. Okay, moving on, we're almost finished. This one to show what happens if plants don't get the right kind of minerals. Again, we'll be touching back on this again later on. But the two kind of minerals that we're interested in are nitrogen and magnesium. Now, of course, if you remember from when we looked at nutrients, you remember that the key, that one of our main nutritional groups is proteins. Now, when proteins break down, the basis of them is amino acids. And if we break that down even further, amino acids' key kind of component is nitrogen. So we need nitrogen to make amino acids, which are subsequently needed to make proteins. And of course, we need those proteins for growth. So what happens if we don't get enough nitrogen? Well, we get slow growth, weak stems, and yellow leaves. And you can see all of those features here in this plant that hasn't had any nitrogen compared to this plant, which has. Okay, it's stunted, it's gone yellow, and it's obviously not growing as quickly. The other ion deficiency or mineral deficiency we need to talk about is magnesium, or magnesium ions. And these are used to make chlorophyll. So you can see these leaves here. There's light areas, and that basically means that they're not getting enough magnesium to make chlorophyll. So chlorophyll is this usually dark green color, and you can see here it's a much lighter green, which shows us much less chlorophyll present. And so this yellowing of the leaves is a very typical symptom of leaves that are deficient in magnesium. On to our last thing that we're going to speak about in today's video lecture. And that is something what we call eutrophication. So we know that nitrogen and magnesium are needed for healthy plant growth. And what we often do is we find these nitrogen and magnesium as well as phosphorus and potassium, which are also needed for plant growth, in things like fertilizers. Now, that can be a big problem because if we put too much fertilizer in the ground and it gets washed out of the soil, it can end up into rivers. And that process is known as leaching. So what generally happens then, the algae which live in the rivers or the waterways or even indeed the ocean or inland sea have a rapid period of growth, okay, due to these extra nitrates that are in the water around them. Following this growth, when they run out of resources and things that they need, they die very quickly and they start to sink to the bottom. Now, when they sink, bacteria will start to break them down or decompose them. And when bacteria start to decompose the algae, the bacteria respire at a very, very high rate and use up all the oxygen in the water. And then, of course, what happens is if the oxygen's all used up, nothing under the water can survive due to a lack of oxygen, and they all die. So eutrophication is a big problem, and so responsible use of fertilizers is a real key thing. Okay, again, thank you for listening. Please go back, rewatch certain sections to complete your notes, and I will see you guys later.